All right, if I can have everyone's attention, please. Thank you. Good afternoon to all in attendance today here and those watching online. Laverne has a rich history of service to society, whether locally, statewide, nationally, or even internationally. Back around 2007, Laverne was spotlighted in the nationally acclaimed series, The War, put on by Ken Burns. Today, we are blessed to highlight another war veteran here from Laverne, Elmer Hovland, and how his service during World War II crossed paths with the family of our guest speaker here today, Nina Willner. Nina Willner is the author of two critically acclaimed books, The Boys in the Light and 40 Autumns. Prior to her writing career, Nina was a U.S. Army intelligence officer who served in Berlin during the Cold War. Following her career in intelligence, Nina worked in Moscow, Minsk, Prague, Ottawa, and Istanbul, promoting human rights, children's causes, and the rule of law for the U.S. government, nonprofits, and a variety of charities. After years living abroad, she now writes narrative nonfiction full-time from her home in Washington, D.C. Let's give a warm welcome to Nina as we respectfully listen to her story and the intersection of our local community member, Elmer Hovland.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Mr. Johnson, and thank you all for that really warm welcome. To begin with, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I know we have some notable people and groups in the audience. I'd like to recognize Mayor Pat Boshin and City Council members, County Administrator Mr. Kyle Oldry, and the Rock County Board of Commissioners, Superintendent Craig Oftedal and staff. I understand that there are some distinguished members of the American Legion in the audience, and I know that there are military veterans in the audience today. So thank you all for being here. Also the Chamber of Commerce, those who have helped coordinate this visit, including Shara Hovland, John Hovland, and the whole Hovland family, for all their support and friendship over the years, and to those who have helped me along the way, Lori Sorensen of the Rock County Star Herald, Omar Olson, and if I've left anyone out, I sincerely apologize for that. To Mr. Johnson, teachers, parents, and to the students of Laverne High School, I came all the way from Washington, D.C. today to visit you. Why am I here? I'm here because one of your hometown boys, Elmer Hovland, saved my father's life. I'm here to tell you a story about a very ordinary young man who was born and raised in Kenneth and attended Laverne High School. What was it about this very ordinary boy who came from this community, a boy who never wanted to be in the spotlight, didn't care to be the center of attention, and yet here we are, he's the center of attention today. So I'd like to start by reading the first few sentences of the first chapter in my book. And it starts like this. 8-year-old Elmer Hovland stood steadfast on the dusty plains beneath the big open skies of Kenneth, Minnesota, wheat blonde hair waving in the wind, his clear blue eyes taking on the color of the sky. His parents, Nels and Mary, were devout Lutheran immigrants from Uppland, Norway, who in the late 1890s, along with 1 million other Norwegians, left poverty and hunger in their homeland for a pioneering life on the Great Plains of Minnesota. And so that sets the stage for my story. Norwegian immigrants, a devout family, farmers who worked hard and taught their children to care about those around them. So let's start with a few pictures of Elmer as a kid. So that picture on the left is from a news article. That's Elmer, the little guy. There's an arrow pointing to him there. You can see, and the caption reads, "At age 12, Elmer Hovland, the youngest member of the hometown band, plays the drums and trumpet in the Kenneth, Minnesota Memorial Day Parade, 1932. And the picture on the right, that's Elmer standing just to the right of the lady in the center. So I thought I'd throw in these pictures, especially given that the Tri-State Band Festival is happening this week, and I thought that would be very appropriate. By all accounts, so this is Elmer probably at around the age of 13 or 14. By all accounts, Elmer enjoyed his high school years here at Laverne. He liked being part of a group. He was a member of 4-H and played football. He loved music, so he taught himself how to play several instruments, and then pulled together a high school band that played swing at local venues, where the most they ever made for any gig was $3, which they split 5 ways. They once even made it on South Dakota radio. So I found this entry in his high school newspaper. "When Elmer Hovland plays his horn, you'd swear he had talent the day he was born." Elmer followed his own star. His lack of interest in being the center of attention drew his classmates to him even more. If someone was being ignored, he found a way to include him. His senior class yearbook quote was, "I never met a person I didn't like." He got average grades. Yes, I looked up his report cards. That's what authors do. Another reason to get good grades, because you never know if someone's going to write a book about you. So he was going to school working on the family farm. And as Elmer was going through high school, meanwhile, in Germany, in around 1933, little Eddie, my father, is a little German Jewish kid. So that's him on the left. Very cute picture, I think. And there he is on the right with his parents. So in Germany, Hitler and the Nazis come to power, and Hitler becomes chancellor, the leader of Germany, and Hitler is a racist, and he hates Jews. Based on baseless accusations and lies, he blames a lot of Germany's problems on the Jewish people. And he starts to turn Germans against them. And suddenly, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Nordic-looking Christian children are valued, and Jewish kids are not. In school, Eddie and the other Jewish kids are separated out from the rest of the student population and made to move to the back of the classroom, where they are basically either ignored or bullied by their classmates. Everyone is taught the Nazi salute. That's a classroom there, much like the one Eddie was in. And so the German people are stepping up to pledge 100% loyalty, not to serve their country, not to serve a constitution, which is what we pledge to serve, but the man, Adolf Hitler himself. So by and large, Germans are just more or less blindly following a guy who, as it turned out to be a madman. And a dark cloud descends over Germany. So this is the Hitler Youth. These are boys ages 14 to 18 signing up to serve Hitler and to torment Jews. In schools, children are taught that Jews are not genetically normal human beings. Can you imagine that? The Nazis called them vermin and parasites. And people started signing on to this hateful behavior. And before long, ordinary citizens all over Germany are calling Jews vermin and parasites. And then it gets worse. They're called Untermensch, subhuman. And no longer are Jews allowed to go to places like, public places like parks, swimming pools, grocery stores, to the movies. Signs are posted throughout towns and cities in Germany and across Europe saying Jews are not welcome here. German kids are playing board games called Jews Get Out, where whoever captures 6 dunce-capped Jews and kicks them out of the village, is declared the winner. In school, they're shown charts like this one, which shows how you can spot a Jew by his facial features, by the way he walks, trying really hard to make kids really believe that Jews are different from everyone else. This is racial targeting at its worst. So Hitler's power spreads all over Germany and throughout Europe. People sign on to target, torment, and beat up Jews. That's little Eddie at around 7 years old when this is all happening. So I'm sure some of you have read Anne Frank's diary. Here's what she wrote in her diary while hiding from the Nazis. Terrible things are happening outside. Poor, helpless people are being dragged out of their homes, families torn apart, men, women, and children separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared. And so by now, Jews across Europe are being swept off the streets and landing in concentration camps. Non-Jews, by the way, are also being sent to camps. In fact, anyone who speaks up at this point, Christians who are speaking up against what's happening, some 2,000 priests and ministers are killed for speaking out against Hitler, Roma, gays, the handicapped, and others. Eddie and his Jewish classmates are kicked out of their public school, they lose their jobs, Jews lose all their rights, their money, their homes, their jewelry is taken from them, and so Jewish people throughout Europe go on the run, trying to get out of Europe any way they can. Here's Eddie at around 13 or 14 years old, and at this point he was yanked out of his class in the 8th grade when he went on the run with his parents. But they were caught by the Nazis and sent to concentration camps in a terrible place called Auschwitz, where they became slave labor for the Nazis. They live in horrendous conditions where they are starved and abused. In the concentration camp, Eddie meets another boy. While Eddie's a German Jew, Mike is a Dutch Jewish kid who comes from Holland. In fact, he lived not far from Anne Frank. So these two boys land in the camps. They're both around 15 years old, and they become best friends while doing slave labor, working alongside much bigger men. And by the way, in the camps, if you can't perform your job, the Nazis simply do away with you. So the stakes are very high, and it's a very scary place. So you can see they're wearing the blue and white striped uniforms. Jews were the only ones to wear the blue and white striped uniforms, so they were the only ones, yeah. So meanwhile, in America, Americans are getting ready to go to war to fight Hitler and the Nazis. Elmer Hovland is drafted along with thousands of others. There's Elmer. So I'm sure you probably already know that 20 out of 21 young men in the graduating class of Laverne High School in 1939, I believe it was, went off to war. I understand that one had a medical issue and couldn't go, but that's really quite a statistic. So Laverne's sons joined the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and across America, hundreds of thousands of young men and women are signing up to fight as infantrymen, sailors, and airmen. Now, a select few are chosen to become officers and leaders of their units. Most of those officers are college boys. Some are West Point graduates. Elmer Hovland wasn't a college man. He was a high school graduate. But the sergeants recognized something special in Elmer, and he was selected to become an officer, even without any college, and that's pretty unusual. So now, apparently only ever seeing himself as just one of the boys, one of the guys, Elmer said to the recruiter, "But I don't want to be an officer. And the recruiter said, "You don't have a choice, son. You're going to be an armor officer." So at the age of 22, Elmer becomes a tanker, an armor officer, and Lieutenant Hovland becomes a leader of men. So that's obviously Elmer on the left there as a young lieutenant, and on the right is the class photo of the 140 young men of D Company, 32nd Armored Regiment of the 3rd Armored Spearhead Division, which means they will be fighting on the front lines. So they came in at Omaha Beach and landed in France. Here's a map that shows you their path through Europe on the left there. Whoops. I'm moving too fast. You can see that arrow comes down from England there, goes right to France and across Germany, Belgium, and Germany. Their entry to war was hard and frightening. From day one, they had lots of problems with their tanks. Their tanks were blowing up and their friends were being killed right from the start. What they realized very quickly was that the Sherman tanks were no match for the bigger, more powerful German tanks. Also, the German soldiers were very seasoned fighters. These American boys were all new at this. A new unit with a new tank, many young men, as I said, straight out of high school. Problems arose inside the tanks. Gears malfunctioned, springs leaked oil, radios died. Sometimes a round would get stuck in the floor lockers, clogging the escape hatch when they needed to bail. In some cases, crews were pushing each other aside and trying to bail out first. They had to get faster and better at getting everyone out of a burning tank. So there was a lot of fear. What's worse, the top guy in charge of the entire company, the company commander, a captain, was, let's just say, not up to the task of leading. So someone had to step in and take charge, and that someone was Elmer. That's Elmer as a platoon leader with his tank D-17. So Elmer saw that there was no time to linger or to be down about their situation in the middle of war, so he got to work. Tankers started strapping logs to their tank to try to give themselves some added protection. Here's a picture of some of the tankers in the company. And after a time, under Elmer's direction, over the course of several months, those young men learned to control their fear and get the hang of their tanks, figuring out how to improvise, how to make up for the tank's shortcomings, and increase their chances of survival. So I'd like to read another passage from the book. This information, by the way, came from the men that Elmer served with. You know, Elmer might not have had a college education, but as many of those other officers did. But as I say in the book, Elmer never stopped working. He was constantly poring over maps, studying the terrain, looking over spot reports. He stayed up nights with the enlisted soldiers, brainstorming over attack plans for the next day's fight. With a twig, he drew tactics in the dirt, the sergeants gaming out their ideas with their lieutenant. He was quick to mine the brain power and instincts of those around him and sought out what others with more experience had to say, taking in their opinions and coming up with the best plan. As one tanker said, he listened, then he led. Unlike some officers with higher education, Elmer possessed something you couldn't learn in college. Traits formed by a combination of a farmer's horse sense, toughness, humility, and a firm belief that the group was always more important than the individual alone. Elmer had no ego. He didn't crave the spotlight. He wasn't motivated by accolades or promotions. He was impervious to rank. From the colonel to the cook, everyone mattered just the same. He thought a soldier's character and skills far more important than the grade on their sleeve. Despite his casual manner, crews grew to respect Elmer, who they now referred to as the lieutenant, and they stood a little taller when they spoke to him. Like a football coach with truculent confidence, Elmer reassured the crews to believe in themselves and to trust in their collective strength. His confidence was intoxicating and set the tone for the rest of the war. As they fought their way into Germany, the NCOs knew that their best chances were with the Minnesota farm boy at the helm. So under Elmer's guidance, they got better at what they were there to do, better and smarter at maneuvering their tanks, and better at their missions. Elmer guided them to calm down, to get a hold of their nerves, and to learn how to move their tanks faster than the German tanks, and how to function as a team. And through it all, while he was busy building a stronger and more effective company on the battlefield, those young men became closer than brothers. So the unit slowly became more competent in battle, and the senior sergeants started looking less often to their incompetent company commander, the captain, and more often to Lieutenant Hovland to lead them. Take the time in the Battle of the Bulge, when Company D became trapped, surrounded by the enemy on all sides. It was a dire situation. The captain thought they were all doomed, and he resigned them all to be taken prisoners of war by the Germans. But the Germans were not just taking prisoners, sometimes they were shooting American prisoners. And the captain just kind of gave up. So once again, Elmer stepped up, and I'd like to read, that's the last portion of my book I'd like to read today. It's that scene. With the captain off and drinking, sergeants in the boat were floating out here alone. He wanted to do, but didn't want to hold the fate of the entire company in his hands. We're completely surrounded, he said. What do you guys want to do? The way I see it, he continued, we got two options. We can stay out here and let the Germans move on us, or we can fight our way out. He looked around. We're taking a vote. The answer was unanimous. We'll fight our way out. So I won't spoil that scene for you because I know some of you may want to read the book. But let me just tell you that Elmer saved the day. And that day, the boys of Company D would never forget Elmer's cool-headed leadership on that day, which saved them from being killed or captured. And from that day onward, the 23-year-old lieutenant, who never wanted to be in the spotlight in the first place, became their North Star. Not long after that, the captain was wounded in action. And another captain, a West Pointer, was due to take over the company. But in a highly unusual breach of military rules, the senior sergeants marched up to headquarters and demanded that Lieutenant Hovland be made their company commander, their official leader. The colonel rejected the idea, saying that Elmer was too young, too junior, and too unproven to take command of a frontline unit in the middle of combat. But the sergeants insisted that Elmer be made their leader. They wouldn't back down, and one sergeant saying, "Colonel, we're only following Hovland." And that is how Elmer Hovland became company commander. Company commander sometimes drove around in a Jeep, and that's Elmer on the left with his driver Private Smiha, who, by the way, was also a young man from Minnesota. In Cologne, Germany, Elmer got hit by a sniper. The bullet pierced the helmet, but it didn't hurt him. That picture on the left was taken during combat. You can see him completely unfazed, talking on the radio there in the middle of combat. And the one on the right is the pierced helmet as it sits today in the Medal of Honor Museum in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So how did he do as company commander? Well, his men loved him. He had to make a lot of hard decisions, but he took charge. Through it all, he constantly turned to his Christian faith to guide him. He carried a little combat pocket Bible and turned to it often. He leaned on his roots, and he reverted back to those traits of character that were grounded in this community, a character that was grounded in the qualities that this community had roots in its young people, to raise and guide a young person to step up, to have a backbone, and to lead. Time and time again, Elmer embraced the adage that the group was more important than one individual alone. Thinking not of himself, he thought about how he could bring others up, increase their confidence in themselves, and how he could bring them together. So meanwhile, in Germany, the two Jewish boys, Eddie and Mike, who had made friends in the concentration camps, are languishing in Nazi prisons. That's a picture of the camp on the left, and the crude wooden bunks they slept in, 3 or 4 people crammed into one bunk. And as they were boys, it's mostly men in these bunks, so there were very few boys who made it through this. This is not Eddie, but it's a young man from the same concentration camp. They survived doing hard labor on 1 3-inch square piece of bread a day and a bowl of soup, which was mostly just water. By the way, you can't escape this place because it's like a supermax prison. The roll call square, where they had to stand in perfect formation several times a day and take the torment of the Nazis, sometimes standing for hours and taking the abuse of the Nazis. In time, the boys are moved to another camp called Langenstein, which was even worse. In this camp, life expectancy for a grown man was 6 weeks. And by now, the two boys, Eddie and Mike, had somehow already survived 8 weeks. But just when they thought they were close to the end, they were put on a march heading out of the camp. My father, Eddie, said that he knew he was dying and that he could not have lasted much longer. So they were put on this march out of the camp. Many prisoners were just too exhausted and died along the way. But Eddie and Mike not only survived, but on the 3rd day of the march, they escaped, and they ran for their lives. About a week later, they came out of the woods to find Elmer and the tankers of Company D. In a newspaper interview many years later, Elmer would recall that moment, that they were shaking and extremely exhilarated, and they were repulsively emaciated. So can you imagine what that scene must have been like? Young American soldiers, 18 to 23 years old, standing across from these two boys in blue and white striped uniforms who had been through something horrible and were in their last stages of life. Now, as company commander on the front line, Elmer had been given very strict orders to bypass any refugees that they encountered along the way. Now, what would you do if you were in charge and your orders were to surge on and not pay attention to anything else along the way? I mean, let's face it, you're on the front lines, you're the commander, and you have a mission and everyone's depending on you to get the mission done. Well, Elmer looked over the two boys. He could have left them to be recaptured by the Germans, or to die of starvation. But in that instant, he defied those direct orders, not worried about the consequences of losing his command or any other punishment. He recognized that these were no ordinary refugees, but these were victims of an awful crime. And in that moment, he made the decision to save the two boys. So without slowing down the tempo of the mission, he turned to the tankers of D Company and said, "They're with us now." And the unit went right back into combat. That call most likely saved my father and Mike's lives. So at the first break in combat, Elmer had the boys taken back to the battalion aid station, where they cared for and weighed the boys, both of them coming in at around 75 pounds. And then Elmer called forward the cook in the kitchen, and he said, "Put him to work in the kitchen." At this point, the two boys could barely stand up. So the cook stared dumbfounded at the extremely fragile boys, then looked over to Elmer and asked, "What exactly do you want me to have them do, sir?" And Elmer said, "Eat." Over the next couple of months, after the boys had gained a little weight, Elmer turned them over to the boys of Company D, who helped bring Eddie and Mike back to life. So you can read about that part in my book as well. I won't spoil that one for you either, but I'll just say that over time, they began to heal both physically and emotionally, in as much as it was possible. So Elmer there we go. Elmer got the two boys Army uniforms and got them on the payroll as they helped the unit in any way they could. Eddie, that's my father on the right there. Eddie, because he was German, he was able to help translate things from German to English, whether it was maps found on German prisoners or letters found, or war plans, and he even helped to interrogate German prisoners. That's Elmer on the left. And yes, Elmer gave him a pistol. I don't know if you can see that, but he's wearing a Colt 45 in a holster there. That picture, by the way, was taken about 4 months after my dad had gained some weight. So they stayed together for 6 months through the end of war. But with the war now over, the Americans were going home. And unfortunately, there was no way to take the two survivors with them back to America. So soldiers and survivors said goodbye to one another, and the two Jewish boys, still wearing their American uniforms, walked back into a war-torn Germany to try to find their families. Eddie went back to his hometown to find that no one else in his family had survived. Mike, the same thing. Both teenagers had been left alone in the world. They had lost everything and everyone. Then Eddie and Mike, at around the age of 18, applied to try to emigrate to America. And about a year later, they were approved for visas, sailed to the United States, where they were welcomed by the Statue of Liberty before disembarking. With only an 8th grade education, or not even an 8th grade education, Eddie joined the U.S. Army, that's him on the left there, and Mike went into the Air Force, and the U.S. military became their new families. Later, Eddie became an officer in the Army. Mike became a master sergeant in the Air Force. They became proud American soldiers who wanted to give back to the country that had saved them. In America, they tried to find Elmer and the boys of Company D, but they never did. Until 60 years later, with the advent of the internet age, they finally found each other again. I first met Elmer when he came to visit us in around the year 2000. My dad, Eddie, and our family hosted him. That picture on the left is taken, of course, back in the war, and the picture on the right was Elmer's first visit to see us in Washington, D.C. They asked me to take them to Arlington National Cemetery so they could pay respects to World War II soldiers. There's Elmer sitting on the couch in my house. I don't even think the Hovlands have seen this picture, but he's sitting there on the couch with just part of my family. As I said, my dad, who was sitting next to him, had lost his whole family in the Holocaust. And after he got married, our family grew a lot. My parents had 6 children, and we, in turn, had lots of babies. So that is just part of the family there, probably about half of us at the time. There we go. I treasured my conversations with Elmer, but to be honest, he was sometimes a pretty difficult subject. A difficult subject to interview because it was hard to get him to talk about himself. He talked a lot about his men, who he served with in the war. He was just so proud of them. But I recall one interview where his son Steve did with him, where he was trying to get him to talk about his awards. That's a silver star up there on the picture. And he said, "Now, Dad, what did you get the silver star for?" "You know, that's one of America's highest decorations, Dad." To which Elmer said something like, "Oh, everyone gets one of those." And Steve said something like, "Okay, so that's not true, Dad. Not everyone gets one of those. But can you remember what you got yours for?" To which Elmer replied, "Well, Sergeant Hagg put me in for that." So Steve tries one last time and he says, "Okay, Dad, but why did you get it? What did you get it for?" To which Elmer finally says, "Oh," and you think the answer's finally coming. And then he says, "You know what Sergeant Hagg did that one time?" And he went on to talk about something great that the Sergeant Hagg had done on the battlefield. But later I found out that Elmer was awarded the Silver Star for his leadership, heroism, and bravery in the Battle of the Bulge. As I said, he gave his soldiers all the credit. Here's Elmer in his own words. I think I have a delayed response here. I'm going to turn it off and turn it back on, see if that helps. There we go. I think I'll turn it off, try turning it off. Thank you. So this came from one of Elmer's interviews. He said, "We had a lot of good men, farmers, strong, a lot of faith, men of faith in the Lord and family and country. As an individual, you weren't that important," he said, "until you were part of a good group. The spirit of cooperation and working together made you strong." In one interview, when he was asked, "What kept you strong?" not surprisingly, Elmer said, "My Christian faith. I carried that catechism that they issued. I read from that every morning and every night. That's the reason I think I'm here today," he said. "It's because I put my trust in the Lord and He more than took care of me. When you're about to face death in battle, you needed something to keep you going. It made me realize there was something bigger than just me. I realized it had to be God, and I believed He was on our side." When asked about the 2 survivors that the company had saved in the middle of combat, Elmer said, "They needed all the compassion that we as Americans could give them, and Americans are notably compassionate." He continued, "There were no clear manuals on how to handle every situation. You made judgment calls. My judgment was to take care of them because it was humane." Elmer's men had a lot to say about him. If I could get this to go, I'll tell you what he said. So like this was a loader, one of his tank loaders, who said, "The love these men have for him is a rare thing. They would have followed that man anywhere." So I wanted to come here today to meet you all, because that character came from this community. The values taught in this community that made him who he was. Values of humility, compassion, leadership, making connections, including everyone, finding the good in people, working hard, and unifying people, all with no ego and not asking for anything in return. That kind of decency was born right here in this community. All right, so let's switch gears here a little bit. Here are a few extra photos. So I thought these pictures were kind of cool. Here's a nice picture of the Hovlands on a family camping trip. And there's a picture of my family on a similar camping trip. During my research, I found a letter that my dad, Eddie, had written to Elmer that said, "It's because of you that I have a great life as an American." And he did. He was filled with gratitude for the support and freedoms and peace that this country gave him. That's my dad, Eddie, on the right there, my mom, my brothers and sisters. That's me on the far left there. That is a picture of the two survivors, Mike on the left, the Dutch kid, and Eddie, well, it's not a kid anymore in that picture, and that's Eddie on the right. They had been through a lot of things together, had survived a lot of incredible stories, situations, which you can read about in the book, and they were truly closer than brothers. I even named my son after Mike. Before I wrap things up, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the greatest generation. It's likely that someone in your family served in World War II. 16 million Americans went to war, and a staggering 420,000 didn't come back. It was a hard-fought, hard-won war where America and her allies defeated evil and brought peace to the world. And it's something that we as Americans should be eternally proud of. Just a few notes before I wrap it up. I brought some books to sell. If anybody's interested, I'm selling them at my cost. If you're interested, I'm happy to sign them for you as well. I understand that will be set up in the Commons after this presentation. If you prefer to listen to the story, it's on audible.com as well. And I'll be at the Sioux Falls Barnes & Noble tomorrow morning from 9 to 11, and then at the First Baptist Church here in Laverne tomorrow from 2 to 4, and I'll hopefully meet some of you then. I know I didn't get a chance today to answer any questions from the audience or anything like that, but I'd be happy to do that tomorrow, either in a group or personally. If you want to come up and talk to me, I would love that. So that'll be tomorrow from 2 to 4 at the First Baptist Church. And finally, I'd like to close my presentation with this. President Abraham Lincoln, in his first inaugural address, spoke about the better angels of our nature in order to appeal to a common sense of humanity. I believe that Americans are fundamentally a people of goodwill, and that goodwill is what defines us, and it should continue to define us. Now, I know there's a lot of noise in this country right now that feels like it's taking us off course from that goodwill. There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of division. So it's on each of us individually to do our part and to choose to do the right thing at every turn. Listen to your gut. Watch out for each other. Moral integrity matters. Kindness and compassion matter. And doing the right thing matters. But sometimes it takes an ordinary person among us to remind us what it is to be a good American and to just be a good human being. Elmer Hovland was that kind of person. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Elmer Hovland, and thank you to this community for raising such a man. You can be very proud. Thank you.
All right, guys, hang on. Hang on. Guys, hang on 1 second, please. Still got a couple more things to deal with here.
Okay? Okay. So I just like to take a quick minute to present something to Mr. Johnson for the entire school, and it's a copy of the book, signed copy of the book that I hope finds its way to your school library. So that's that. And I'd also like to give him a picture of Elmer with my father, the one you saw on the screen, and I hope that you will be able to find a place for this someplace in the schools. So, thank you.
I want to thank Nina for this wonderful opportunity to be able to hear the stories. We're very, very blessed for what we have here. Very, very blessed because those people who have gone before us, who have paved the path for us, who have set an example for the service to our communities and to our country. And when you guys think about where you guys are at what path and in what ways are you able to do and exemplify the same things that Elmer Hovland was able to do, that was right here in the community, and the wonderful things that was done. We're also going to, right now at this point in time, we're going to introduce to you Kyle Oldry, who represents the Rock County. He is going to be presenting a proclamation here real quick. So let's welcome Kyle.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Rock County Board, this is on behalf of Gary Overgaard, Chair of the Rock County Board. These are some remarks. On behalf of the County Board of Commissioners, I would like to welcome you all this afternoon. I'm sorry I cannot be with you today. The Board of Commissioners would like to congratulate the family of Elmer Hovland, who I don't know if you've noticed, they're in the back, right smack dab in the middle. The family of Elmer Hovland and Nina Willner, the author, for honoring the service and the memory of Elmer. Nina did an excellent job of researching and informing us of the brutality of war and what these young men experienced. Who would have thought that a young Norwegian American soldier from Kenneth in southwest Minnesota could have accomplished all that he did in service to his country? I would like to thank Nina for writing the book and bringing to light the horrors and tragedy of war. I would also like to thank Omar Olson for helping us to draw up this proclamation. Omar is a 1967 graduate of Laverne High School, and we appreciate everything he has done. Once again, congratulations to Elmer Hovland family, Nina Willner, and Omar Olson for relating this long overdue story and recognition of the people they deserve. And he also ended with thank you to all those who have served. Now it's my pleasure to read the proclamation that the County Board adopted. Proclamation by the Rock County, Minnesota Board of Commissioners honoring Nina Willner for the publication of her compelling book, The Boys in the Light. Whereas the Rock County Board of Commissioners wishes to formally recognize and extend its appreciation to Nina Willner for her outstanding work in writing and publishing the book, which indeed brings to light the story of Bronze and Silver Star hometown hero, Lieutenant Elmer Hovland, thus amplifying the service of all Rock County veterans and their families. Whereas this book honors the legacy and sacrifice of Elmer Hovland during World War II, ensuring that his courage and contributions to the war effort will never be forgotten by future generations in Rock County, nor the lives of millions devastated in the Holocaust. And whereas Nina Willner's meticulous and painstaking research serves as an invaluable act of local historical preservation, capturing the experiences and bravery of one of our own and his Company D of the 3rd Armored Division, which he self-effortlessly and wisely led, reinforcing the importance of our community's role in a pivotal moment in world history. And whereas through the telling of this heroic story, Nina Willner has enriched the historical understanding of our community and further inspired current and future citizens with a powerful narrative of patriotism, service, and sacrifice. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Rock County Board of Commissioners does hereby commend Nina Willner for her work, also her own military service, and declare this proclamation as a recognition in her honor during and after her visit to the North Star State, where she will always be welcome. And as will the memory of her brave father, Eddie Willner, In witness thereof, we have caused the seal of Rock County to be affixed for a community assembly the 26th day of September, 2025.
Before we go, I just want to take a real quick moment. I'd like the Hovland family to please stand up right now. These would be Elmer's sons, daughter, and their in-laws. So let's give them a round of applause too. All right, students, we want you to go back to your 6th hour class. Unless you do have some pressing questions you'd like to come up and ask Nina, or even possibly even